Woohoo!
So, a few episodes I introduced the term metaphysics. Do you remember what that means?
Is it when you try to apply things in this universe to other universes?
Yeah, most basically, that's exactly what it is. I mean, I think it's most noted in terms of sort of the Middle Ages when they were trying to say things about God, detailed things about God.
Yeah.
In terms of, Aquinas asked how many angels could you fit on the head of a pin? And extrapolating from what we know about this universe to how that universe might work. When we first talked about this, I introduced a more seductive metaphysical statement that's been popularized by Elon Musk. And that is, it's most likely that we live in a simulation because within the first 10,000 years of technological development in our own society, we've created simulations that have artificial intelligences in them.
Yeah.
Right? So, but once again, as I said, that's a very dangerous and seductive thing to do. Not something that we really often think of as good philosophy. Having said that, today, I'm feeling a little naughty. So I'm thinking, let's do a little metaphysics today and see if there's any value to it at all. In order to get us into a little metaphysics, I want us to think about what it would be like to be God.
Okay.
In most religions, God is eternal.
Yeah.
What would that feel like as a being to have no beginning?
As humans, we're not really capable fully, I think, of understanding what it's like to be immortal or eternal. But in terms of having no beginning, you can't really wrap your head around always existing, because as people, it feels like we've always existed. We can't imagine a time outside of when we existed. But to have truly always existed means that there was no time before you. So I'm not sure. I guess I would say that it might actually feel sort of similar to how we feel now, because before we were born, we had no idea of consciousness or anything like that. But I can't imagine that it would feel the same. Like, it has to feel pretty different to just have always existed.
You say that we can't conceive of a time outside of ourselves, but we can do that as human beings.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that we can do is we can say where we came from, right? I can talk about how, my parents were doing this, and then me and their grandparents, and go back quite a ways, and, how humanity started and how the earth started, and all of that preceded me. So to me, it's not quite so crazy, right? Because I can talk about my beginning.
Without a beginning, God wouldn't have a family history, wouldn't have things to learn or be taught, wouldn't have like anything at all to fall back on, and would just be alone. Like, being there eternally and having no beginning means that you've been there since the beginning. Means that you were the first and the only thing.
And there's no before.
There's no before.
So there's no since the beginning.
There's no since the beginning.
There is no beginning. Weird, right?
And like, that's impossible to perceive.
Yeah, well, I think that it is hard. And I think that it's something that when people think about our beginning as human beings and start to step back and back and back into the evolution of our planet and the creation of our planet and the moment where this planet or this universe expanded and became what it is, we keep wanting to go back further. We want to go back before that, right? Like, what's before this universe then, right? But we as human beings have absolutely no information on that at all. Do you think that people who believe in God think about this at all?
I think that some people that believe in God probably do think about this stuff, like theologists or people that study religion while still being a part of it, or people that really try to read the Bible fully and try to completely understand their own religion. But I think that the vast majority wouldn't go so far as to really question God. And I think in some cases it might seem like blasphemy to try to question God.
Let's take it to the other side, the end. What would that feel like to have no end?
Well, that's something that's technically a little bit easier to understand from a human perspective, but in some ways equally difficult because, like I said before, we can't really understand immortality. We aren't really built to last forever. But to really never end, to be truly immortal and eternal, and to exist forever would be exhausting.
Well, so in some sense, you're saying that being is a burden.
It's difficult to say existing is a burden necessarily, but I guess that in some ways it is. Like the eternal struggle of having to wake up and get out of bed over and over and over again. It's like, it doesn't seem like that much in the beginning, but after years and years and years, it would seem like a struggle. But then again, for God, it's like he's not exactly like he has a bed to get up out of, so it's impossible to tell how he would really even perceive being itself.
Do you think it'd get boring?
Yeah, I think it would get boring at a certain point. You could get tired of it, and you could like try like new things or experiment or something like that. It's sort of paradoxical because it's infinities in both directions, and that's just not really how anything works at all. But that means that as far as you've ever progressed in your mental state negatively, that is as far as you're ever going to progress because you've already lived in eternity. Because, like, infinity equals infinity, you know?
Yeah, I know what you're saying. It begins to introduce all sorts of paradoxes. A lot of religions promise eternal life. Do you think that's a blessing or a curse?
Well, in terms of going to hell and eternally being tortured, probably the curse. But in terms of heaven, even though realistically you would get sick of it eventually, with like eternity staring at you in the eye, heaven itself is not meant to be realistic. It's meant to be a concept made out of happiness itself. And even if you could say that happiness would get boring eventually, or you can't survive without sadness, or whatever, those are real things. Those are things applied to real life. And heaven is sort of outside of those bounds.
I don't think that most religions think that you lose your entire identity and you become an entirely different mental creature when you go to heaven.
No, but
So you still have to, so describe it in real terms. Billions and billions and billions of years, and it doesn't even matter because it's just the beginning. It doesn't end, ever.
I think it would be hard.
Do you think that you would ever want to end your existence?
Probably at some points. It would seem like it would be impossible not to, but then there would be no choice to. Because part of being immortal means that there is no end.
What about thinking about God as existing outside of time? Right? Almost like think about like the block universe.
Yeah.
As we think about it in terms of physics. Right? It's just, there is no time. Right? It's just there. It just is.
I guess existing outside of time it could be a better existence, maybe, than immortality. Because at that point, it's difficult to say whether it's really existence at all. Like, he's not impacted by time. He's not moving through time. So there's
no change then.
There's no change.
So there just is.
There just is. It's just eternally existing in one moment.
What we know of being as human beings, that doesn't even sound like anything. It almost sounds like, once again, nothing.
Definitely sounds like nothing.
These are real beliefs. So, this is why it's important to, discuss these and understand these things. Well, so let's move on to another characteristic of God, and that is omnipotence.
Yes.
What does omnipotence mean?
Being all-powerful.
What's that feel like?
Me when I'm playing Minecraft creative mode. When you think of omnipotence, I think you generally like immediately turn to just having every superpower in the world, or just being able to do anything. But then when you really get into like what that would probably mean, it's honestly starts to make the whole existing eternally thing make a lot more sense. Because you'd be able to control literally everything. And that means everything. Like, it doesn't just mean things on this plane of existence or whatever. You'd be able to control things on the molecular level. You'd be able to change the laws of physics at will. You'd be able to literally shape the universe in your hand and then squash it just as easily. You could do anything, and the full extent of anything, I don't think can even be said.
That's the key point. If you're omnipotent, instantly you could create every possibility in the universe, or every possibility that you could conceive, which I guess is everything, instantly.
When it comes to creating everything at once, it sort of seems like nothing to us. It seems like at a certain point it like all cancels out. At a certain point it's like impossible to even look at it anymore.
There's no change anymore, right? Because it's all there.
Yeah.
Simultaneously.
Not only everything physically, but like every instant in time.
So let's go back to omnipotence and immortality. Could you destroy yourself?
That's a tough one, because it sort of feels like those two things are paradoxical, as are a lot of things when we're talking about this God thing. I mean, maybe. Like, you might be able to destroy yourself. Being immortal and all-powerful, it feels like the all-powerful thing kind of trumps over the immortality, because if you're able to change, like, laws in space and the universe itself, then you could change the rules of the universe to be like, okay, well, I'm not immortal anymore.
It would be kind of weird to say that God can't stop existing and he's omnipotent, but I can, as a human being, in my limited scope.
Yeah.
Right? Like that, then I'd be more powerful than God in some way.
Well, God doesn't have a start. So even if God could have been a human-like being, existing for so long would change him.
And it's not existing so long, it's never not existing.
It's never not existing, because if God wanted to not exist, then like God has already existed for as long as he's ever going to exist, you know? So it's hard to tell like what an end would even mean.
Do you think that God could stop existing and yet let his creation continue to exist?
It's almost harder for me to conceive of never beginning and then ending than it is for me to conceive of never beginning and never ending. Because like you say, you're using like these like finite terms here. You're using like, oh, created everything a billion times over, but it wouldn't be that. It would be create everything infinite times over, because you've existed infinitely.
Yeah.
And so it's like, how can infinite not stretch out in both directions?
Yeah.
Because if you've always existed for if you have no beginning,
then by definition you have no end.
If you have a line and it has one point and it stretches out infinitely in the other direction, that is still infinite. And that is, to a certain point, just as infinite as a line stretching out in both directions. And at that point, you begin to question, is the end that he pushed to it really the end, or is it his beginning?
If you believe that if we're God, right, and we have no beginning, then by definition we have no end. And so in some sense, you can't stop that.
Yeah.
You can't stop existing, because you've always existed.
You've always existed.
It's interesting, right? When you really begin to unpack some of these concepts that people throw around so loosely. Omnipotence, not so easy to understand, is it?
No.
So talk to me about the feeling of omniscience, knowing everything.
Man, it's like we keep stacking these things on top of each other, and it's like they can coexist, and they almost like make sense coexisting. It's like, how could they not coexist, you know? But at the same time, it's like it just adds on new paradoxes. It's similar to what we were talking about in terms of the everythings, like in terms of always existing and never not existing, and being able to create everything simultaneously at will. Because it's like, you don't just create everything at will. You already have everything in your head. It's in your mind. And as a god, it's so easy for your mind to become reality. And it's really hard to find a distinguisher between the two.
To some degree, what you're beginning to understand is if you really unpack the concept of omnipotence and omniscience, they almost become the same thing. Because on some level, like, if you know the outcome of everything that you would ever do, what's the difference between that and actually doing it?
Exactly. And it's like,
it doesn't even matter. Like, why would you even create anything? You already know everything anyway.
It makes you question, what is the difference between existence and God's mind? And I've got to say, all of this talk about everything that God would be, it really makes it easier to conceive of the belief that, like, God is the world. Like, I was talking about the difference between God's mind and reality then. Like, the difference between knowing everything and doing everything. And, like, where does it cross over? The belief that God exists in everything, like, that God is, like, simultaneously, like, everything around us, like what we're sitting on, like the floor, the trees, the sky, the sea. It's sort of makes more sense to me, because to a certain extent he is, even if not technically physically. Like, he could be technically physically, like, he has that power, but even if not physically, he knows everything from the perspective of the sea and the sky and everything, and he knows everything just as well as each other.
Well, so in some sense, you're saying that omniscience and maybe omnipotence leads to pantheism, which means that, everything is God.
Yeah.
You, me, everything.
Yeah. That's what I'm saying.
But once again, I think that we run into a real being question. If that being can conceive of all possibilities simultaneously at once and know that all outcomes and all whatevers, then is there any meaning in creation at all?
Maybe we are in God's mind. Inside of a simulation.
Yeah, and once again, I feel like if you knew everything already and always, once again, it begins to feel like the block universe. Like, once you have everything, it's almost the same thing as nothing. If there's no distinctions, if it's just one big...
Yeah.
There's no... It's every... You know what I mean?
Yeah. When you reach this amount of everything, there's this amount of, like, being everything and knowing everything and being able to do everything and always existing and never dying. It's like, yeah, at a certain point, it doesn't necessarily cancel out, but it becomes...
maybe almost meaningless.
Meaningless, yeah, exactly.
So I think that one thing that we're beginning to understand is these concepts that we've applied to God are actually only make sense if we really delimit them to the kind of normal human existence that we have every day. Like, as a human being, like, omniscience means, like, I know everything that's happening in this world, in this universe, right? And being omnipotent means I could fly anywhere and be anywhere and do anything, but there's still something outside of me.
Yeah, there's still something outside of you.
Right.
That's the real thing, because the way that people imagine God is not as truly the one ultimate thing. It is as a thing inside of his own universe.
Inside of this universe.
It is all-powerful, but as long as you are limited by the laws of reality. When realistically, he would be able to alter those at will.
These concepts, as they were applied to God, weren't really fully fleshed out. Like, you can think of, like, oh, well, my God's tougher than Zeus. Oh, he's all-powerful.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
You didn't really think about the implications.
The full implications of some of this stuff haven't been fully unpacked or thought out. I think I would go even further. Not that they haven't been unpacked, but they can't be unpacked because they create paradoxes.
And honestly, I would say if we're really getting down to it, it could even be true that with all these things don't make sense to us just because we can't understand them as humans.
But once again, I think that's a cop-out.
Well, no, yeah, well, let me say this. It is a cop-out, obviously. It's definitely 100% a cop-out. It's definitely 100% people running into these issues and being like,
oh, that's just, God just is,
God
don't understand it, but we don't.
You know what? We were meant to question God as human beings.
Yeah, exactly. I don't think that most people believe in an omniscient, omnipotent, eternal God.
Yeah.
I think they believe in a personal God. Right? It's a personal God that we can have a relationship with.
Yeah.
In most religions.
Yeah.
But I don't think that's an omnipotent, omniscient, eternal being that they're thinking of.
Yeah. The way that people think about their own God is different because they're not breaking it down like we are. We are thinking about it literally. We are thinking about it literally, cause and effect. What are the impacts of this, hypothetically? But Christians aren't thinking about God like literally like that.
And so in most religions, what we really have is a personal God. It's a little bit, and by personal, it almost means a little more person-like.
Definitely person-like.
So let's talk about some of those aspects. A lot of major religions are monotheistic.
Yeah.
What's that mean?
It means that there's only one God.
You're the only one.
The only one there.
What's that feel like?
Your only companionship is things that you've created. You don't have any equals. There's no one that is on the same level that you are. There's no one that can understand you. So as a God,
as not a God, the God.
As the God, you would feel sort of lonely, and you would feel like ununderstood. No one would be able to understand or comprehend you as person as you may be. And so it's definitely a lonely existence. It's definitely sort of a hard existence to never be able to have any sort of true companionship.
Do you think as human beings, we ever have anyone who fully understands us?
I think that as human beings, we're all too different and complicated to even truly understand ourselves. And so even if you could wrap everything about you into, even if you could you could make a list of all of your traits and everything about you and write a whole story about your life, you would still never even begin to truly explain who you are. But I think that as humans, we have the shared experience of being human, of having a limited life. And as we're talking about these hypothetical God things right now, like being immortal, etc., we are fundamentally incapable of understanding any of these things at even a hypothetical level. And so for God, I think it would be significantly more lonely because there would be no shared base of experience, even if that base was just being born and then eventually dying.
We all are very different in our lives, and I think that we can understand that kind of isolation because we feel that as humans.
Yeah.
There is no one who will ever fully understand us.
Yeah.
And as you said, we don't even fully understand ourselves most often. But at some level, we can see that other human beings are the same as us. Yeah. They're the same beings.
Yeah. And if you're going really far, we're just on the same plane of existence.
Yeah, exactly. Depressing a little, not being understood or not ever being able to have something that was your equal. There's something important about having an equal. Don't you agree?
Yeah.
In relationships?
Yeah. To perceive it this way, how lonely eternal existence might be, it makes you understand a little bit how God could have a more personal relationship with humanity. Because it's you create these beings for companionship inherently. Probably that seems like it would be the motivation for this God to create anything.
And I believe most religions say God created humanity in his likeness.
Yeah, in his likeness. Exactly, in his likeness, so that someone could come close to what he is. And even if it's impossible to truly understand him, it's the closest that you might ever get to it. We hope that you enjoyed that video, and if you did, please consider checking out the next one in the series.
Or some of our other series on philosophy and life.
We upload videos every Friday, so don't forget to like and subscribe.
Like and subscribe. See you next week.